What does Sonny Dykes do best, and what can that tell us about this upcoming season? That's coming up here on Locked On Horned Frogs. It's your team. We do it here each and every day.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
That's right, Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. We are through media days, so we're closer to the upcoming football season for TCU and many others. Exciting day. Also, let me know, I did not end up – I was tempted, but I did not end up purchasing a PS5 or an Xbox and get NCAA 25. I'm going to go play the game later this week with a friend of mine. He's been gracious enough to just let me kind of test it out and see how it goes. But maybe eventually I'll make that move. If you did play NCAA 25 today, I'd love to know your thoughts. What did you think about TCU in the game? I believe they're like an 80 overall in the football game, which is lower than Baylor at 82, which kind of made me angry. But anyway, Josh Hoover, many other obviously current players featured there. I'm sure the gameplay is very different. I haven't really played games in about a decade, but NCAA was my favorite video game growing up. So I might eventually have to make that move. Just haven't done it so far. We're on YouTube. Subscribe there. You can also subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. But I want to start today by talking about coaching. Sonny Dykes, I spent a lot of last offseason defending him because there were a lot of lists that came out, as they typically do during the offseason. Best Big 12 coaches, best coaches in America. And Sonny had made some progress within those lists, but he hadn't really made the jump that I thought he should have after winning a playoff game. And then, of course, last season happened, and so now things have sort of regressed back to the mean. But I was looking at this ranking of Big 12 coaches by Athlon Sports, and Sonny comes in at number 7. He's behind Matt Campbell at 6, Willie Fritz at 5, Chris Kleiman at 4, Mike Gundy at 3, Lance Leipold at 2, and then Kyle Whittingham at 1. Really the only issues I have with that, Matt Campbell is a good football coach. I don't really feel like – he made it to a conference title game with Iowa State. He's won at a high level there, which is not something that's been done really ever in Cyclones history. But he's still 53-49 as a head coach, which is very similar to Sonny's record. And really the only advantage he would have over Sonny is the fact that he's done it at the Power 5 level. He's had success at the Power 5 level for a more consistent period of time, but he hasn't reached the heights, obviously, that Coach Dykes did with that incredible season he had in 2022. So I think there's a good argument for Sonny being there at 6. And then also, as much as I love Willie Fritz, and I think that was a great hire for Houston, like I told Parker Ainsworth when Houston made that move, and I think we had him on for like a crossover before that basketball game in January, I was like, I think the best compliment I can give you as a fan of an opposing team that's going to play you guys pretty often is that I was disappointed when I heard that name. I was like, oh, that's a good coach. And Coach Fritz did an outstanding job at Tulane for a long time, won a Cotton Bowl. That was a Cotton Bowl against USC, won some conference titles there, was extremely successful, also did a great job at Sam Houston and at Georgia Southern. But all of his success was at the Group of 5 level. So if the main knock on the Sonny Dykes tenure is, I guess, what he didn't do at Cal when that was a mess, and then the fact that he's had success at the Group of 5 level for the majority of his career, and I think that same criteria really has to apply to Willie Fritz as well, even though he won some conference titles, which is not something that Sonny did at SMU. He might have won one conference title at Louisiana Tech. But I wasn't going to really get into resumes today because my main point was I was just thinking, okay, what is it now that we're in year 3? What is it that Sonny Dykes excels at and does really well? Because all coaches want to put their identity on a football program. For a long time with Gary Patterson, it was tough physical defenses. Gary had great attention to detail and was a freak about film and studied it like crazy. And so his defenses understood tendencies. They had complex responsibilities. The players that played did a good job of processing that, getting to the football, creating negative plays. And he would out-scheme people and win games that way. Now, I think also at his best, Gary had dynamic offenses, and he would allow his offensive coordinators to call plays, to set the culture on that side of the ball, and he wouldn't really tinker with it. And when the team struggled, it was sort of the opposite. The defenses maybe were more middle of the pack, and the offenses were very heavily influenced by what GP saw as complementary football, but I think he could go the other direction, and they could be too conservative. And if you look at the Big 12, somebody asked me today, I was filling in on a radio show, and co-host of mine, Ward Whites, was like, who's the best coach in the Big 12? And then along with that, like, who's the face of the Big 12? And, I mean, from a longevity standpoint, it's either Kyle Whittingham or Mike Gundy. Chris Kleiman's done a nice job. Coach Dykes had an outstanding season in year one at TCU. And then, of course, the person that kind of takes up all the media attention and hype is going to be Deion Sanders, and Deion's done a nice job. And so all those coaches have certain strengths. With Kyle Whittingham and Chris Kleiman, you know that you're going to get fundamentally sound teams that play really hard. There's a big emphasis on player development within those programs. So they're probably not going to win signing day each and every year, but in their eyes they are, because they identify players that fit their system and they know what they envision for those guys. And then if they buy in and they develop, they're going to be highly impactful players for those schools when they're upperclassmen. And then you have the occasional like uber talented player, like I think we're going to see with Avery Johnson at Kansas State, who just from the jump kind of takes over because of his athleticism and his ability. Mike Gundy, sort of the same thing, even though Mike's identity is kind of flipped as his career's gone on. When he started out at Oklahoma State, he was really known more as like innovative offensive guy. And so his team scored a lot. They had high octane skill guys, great wide receivers, some – I guess experienced quarterbacks would be the best way to put it. Maybe not athletically dudes that jumped off the page. I mean, Brandon Weeden kicked around the NFL for a little while. He was a much older college football player. Mason Rudolph has had a nice little NFL career. He had a big arm and could make some throws that not your everyday quarterback could make. But as his career has kind of continued, Oklahoma State has really recently centered more on running the football, being physical, playing good defense, which kind of falls in line with a lot of what the Big 12 is doing. Lance Leipold, very innovative offense, knows how to build a program, knows how to set a culture, and is a great flip guy. And what I mean by that is he'll walk into a place and he'll identify what the issues are and he'll turn it around. Kansas, for the longest time, was that kind of dead-end job in Power 5 football that nobody could figure out except for Mark Mangino temporarily, and Lance Leipold has figured it out. Deion Sanders, he's going to recruit at a high level. He's going to bring in talent, and he's going to allow his coaches do their jobs. And before Colorado fans jump all over me, I mean that as a compliment. Like, that's a huge part of college football is talent acquisition. And Deion uses his name and his connections to get big name players to play at Colorado, especially in the transfer portal. And John Jock Taylor, who used to write for the Dallas Morning News and now does a lot of freelance stuff and has written some books, he wrote a book about Deion, and he was telling Dan Patrick in an interview last year that's his philosophy. Like, he is a CEO coach. He's going to put talented people in positions to succeed, and he has good communication with his assistant coaches. And he's like, look, what do you need? Like, tell me what you need from a talent perspective to be competitive, to be good, so that we can play at the highest level. And they give him, the parameters, the types of players they're looking for, the type of talent they're looking for. And then he goes and gets those guys because he's Deion Sanders. So what is it that Sonny Dykes does at a high level now that we've seen him through 27 games in his TCU career? I think the things that jump to mind for me, he is a more of a hands-off CEO coach, and I think he's really good at identifying talented young assistant coaches who relate to players well, who can recruit at a high level, and also know ball and understand, like, let's run with it. And honestly, a lot of that's on the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, they've got more experience on the coaching side, and it feels like he's kind of relinquishing, that responsibility and saying, hey, Andy Avalos, build the team you want on that side of the football and I'll allow you to do that. And I think that's how we're going to be at our best. The interesting thing is he talked this offseason about culture issues. And last year, just not everybody was really buying in at the level they needed to be successful. And ultimately that falls on the coaching staff. Like, we can blame players, but coaches have to instill that and build an environment where that's encouraged so that the team steps up and does it. And so I feel like one underrated aspect of the perfect storm that happened in year one for Sonny is that he had a very experienced football team, and they were looking for a new voice because it didn't work with Coach Patterson. Like, that group had talent, but the team never really played in the way that we expected. And Sonny also did a really good job of finding undervalued players in the transfer portal who became key pieces of that team. Jared Wiley, Josh Newton, Mark Perry, Johnny Hodges. I mean, all those guys, they were not breaking the national landscape when they decided to commit to TCU, but they filled a void, they filled a role on the roster, and they fit in well with what TCU was building. And so looking at this year, there's a lot of experienced guys coming in from the portal, but you still have a bunch of new faces. And so I think this is going to be a key season to see, all right, what changes has Sonny kind of made in his philosophy and his coaching style, if any, and how will that translate to the field? Because he's mentioned, like, we have to have more attention to detail. We have to be better at these things. But what steps is he actually going to take to get that done? And I'd love to hear from you in the YouTube comments. What do you think it is that Sonny does best? Right? I feel like it's identifying talented coaches and setting people up to succeed, which is a huge part of leadership. It's like, I'm going to find people who do things well. I'm going to let them do their job, and I'm going to oversee kind of the big picture operations and make sure that we're hitting our goals, doing what we're supposed to do. But I'd like to get your perspective and the YouTube comments, You can also tweet at Simcox Steven or the show that Locked On TCU. When we come back, MLB draft has been going on in the middle of All-Star Week. And what does it mean for TCU? Some big news that came down this afternoon. That's all coming up here on Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. eBay Motors. If you need a part for your car, you got to be serious about it. You have to get what is right for your vehicle. eBay Motors is the place to go. Passion, drive, and patience. That's the formula for winning championships. It's also what keeps your ride alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, style, eBay Motors has you covered. Over 122 million parts for your ride. You'll always know exactly what you're looking for. And the eBay Guaranteed Fit program, this is really the key. You can put the make and model of your car there on ebaymotors.com and pick the part, and they will tell you immediately, yes, this is the right part for your vehicle, or no, go back to the drawing board. So you have that reassurance, you have that peace of mind of, okay, I am getting the right part to either maintain my vehicle or level it up to peak performance. Millions of parts for your MVP. Keep your ride humming along at ebaymotors.com. You can burn rubber, not cash there. That eBay Guaranteed Fit program is only available to U.S. customers. But don't go anywhere else. Don't get overwhelmed by going into an auto parts shop and not really knowing what exactly you need and maybe feeling like you're getting upsold to something that is unnecessary. Have that peace of mind with eBay Motors. Use that eBay Guaranteed Fit program. ebaymotors.com. Millions of parts for your MVP. Win every time with parts that fit your ride at eBay Motors. So we're at the All-Star break for Major League Baseball. Home Run Derby was tonight. All-Star game will be on Tuesday. And in the midst of all this, Major League Baseball draft is going on. And so for TCU baseball and for all college baseball programs, there's two sides to this. You're watching, what's happening with our current players that have eligibility left and could come back this upcoming season. Where are they going to get drafted? What's that slot money going to look like? That bonus money going to look like? And does that push them, to leave and go pro? But then also you're wondering about your high school commits, because high school players can be drafted by Major League Baseball teams. And if they get an opportunity to get some life-changing money, there's always a chance they could say, I'm going to forego my college eligibility and I'll go play at the next level. And so one TCU player has been drafted so far, Peyton Tolle. He was taken 50th overall by the Red Sox. They're not interested in making him a two-way player. Of course, he hit very successfully at Wichita State. Had some struggles in the lineup this past year for TCU, and eventually they took him out and said, just focus on pitching. The thing that I love about Peyton, aside from the character and mental toughness he showed this year in the midst of some family tragedy, was from a baseball perspective, he just gives you innings every single time he goes out there. He's kind of a throwback pitcher in that regard that, he'll throw 120 pitches. That velocity stays up because he's just so big and strong. And so I think the Red Sox are getting a really good player and obviously a great person in Peyton Tolle. Excited for him to go to the next level. Another player that is not a current TCU player because he never made the campus, but he's a current commit, Blake Larson, was also selected in the MLB draft. And so it appears that he will most likely be moving on and won't be playing for TCU. He's drafted by the Chicago White Sox on day one. So I would think with that opportunity, he'll end up moving on and won't make it to campus. So that's kind of a bummer. He's one of the guys they were super excited about, left-handed pitcher, and he went number 68 overall to the White Sox. But the good news is some of their other prospects that were super highly rated, like Noah Franco, the outfielder, he hasn't – it's weird to say that's good news because, obviously these guys would be super excited if they're drafted. But as far as TCU goes and their future, Noah Franco, the outfielder, who's their highest rated commit at the time, according to Perfect Game, he has not been selected yet. Mason Brassfield, Trevor Blomler, neither of those guys have been taken either. So anything can happen on day 3, but it would appear that those guys are going to make it to campus, which is really exciting news for TCU baseball. And then as far as current players on the team, Anthony Silva, who started the season as a projected possible first-round pick, he didn't go in day 1 or day 2, and he announced today that he will be coming back to TCU for his junior season. And so, Anthony had an up and down year at the plate. He was still really solid defensively overall. And, when he's on and when he's locked in, he's a stud. And so having another year of eligibility and just that stability at shortstop, I think is going to be a big thing for Kirk Saarloos and his team moving forward. Bill Mosiello, new hitting coach, maybe he can figure some things out with Anthony. I'm sure he'll be working on his mental approach, maybe working on his swing a little bit. He just tore it up as a freshman. So that talent's there. Just need to kind of figure out how to get him in the right space to be a player for them next year. And same thing with Carson Bowen. Similar story. Really exciting freshman year. Struggled last season, but you get another year now to figure out, okay, what went wrong? Let's fix it. So Anthony Silva back next season, that's a big deal. And Peyton Tolle, best of luck to him, and Blake Larson as well, as they move on to Major League Baseball and get a chance to chase their dreams. In that regard, that's all exciting news. Vibes, I think the vibes are pretty high at the moment for the Frogs on the diamond. was disappointing not making the NCAA tournament, but hopefully it's a good wake-up call and a way for them to kind of reset and get where they need to be for this upcoming season so that everybody's on the same page. When we come back, we'll get some of your thoughts. We'll wrap things up. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, part of the Locked On Network, your team every day. So you can always chime in on the YouTube channel. It's a great way to connect with us. Richard Berry says he's super excited for the year coming up. Coach Dykes seems to have the attention where it needs to be on the team mentally. And I do believe they'll make some noise this year. I mean, he's saying all the right things. Now, I mean, hey, you got to execute it on the field. That's the bottom line, right? Like when they hit the field against Stanford, we'll get a much better idea of, okay, what does this team look like? What do they do well? Are they actually putting into practice a lot of the great things that they've said throughout the season about changing the mentality, changing the urgency, the structure, and getting back to that intensity that they had a couple years ago? It remains to be seen. But I do feel like both in words and in actions, we've seen a commitment from Coach Dykes this offseason to improve, whether it was overhauling this defense and saying, all right, we got to change the scheme so that we're more aggressive and in a better place in playing more complementary football, or just talking about how last year he was aware of some mistakes and he knows how to fix it. He knows how to kind of assess the situation and the best way to get after it moving forward. So I think all those things are positive signs. Now you have to actually do it on the football field, but it seems like he gets it from the perspective of, yeah, last season didn't work out super well. We got to change some things. Apollo Miller says the narrative of going back to the national championship needs to start, please. This needs to start going full steam ahead. I mean, hey, I'm all for that. I don't think this particular team is poised to do that. Of course, I didn't feel like a couple of years ago they were either. So I'd love for them to prove me wrong. But I do think this is a big year as far as taking a step forward and just showing more consistency. And so if they can do that in 2024, I'll be really happy. And I think that's a good place to start as they kind of rebrand and build this thing moving forward. And I like the commitment and urgency they have had in high school recruiting this cycle to bring in big name talented players, especially guys that can rush the passer and that can be impact dudes off the edge, because that's going to be a huge part of the San Diablo's defense. We'll be back tomorrow. It's Locked On Horned Frogs. It's your team. We do it here every day.